Hello everybody, you're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rhylight Zone for a short story and or some poetry. We catch up with Twangling Jack Ford over in the Ilk Shed for a weekly album review. And we, what else do we do? Do we go to the Rhylight Zone? We go to the Rhylight Zone for a short story and or some poetry. As always, you can reach out to me here at the studio by dropping me an email on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. And I'm particularly keen to hear from poets, performers, musicians, people with MP3s to share, local arts news, etc, etc. Don't hesitate to get in touch. You can also find us on Facebook. If you search for The Archer on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. And we are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. So this week we are having a Twangling Jack album review special, but before we do that, we're going to catch up with A.B. Frank over in the Rhylight Zone for a few instalments of his flash fiction.
The cells of the Order of Occult Eradication were a lonely place. Not a place where joy and laughter frequent in the dark, dank depths. A place where whispers carry and unsettling sounds cease not. In the corner, I can see the entirety of the cell and the creeping shadows beyond the door. Fear has pinned me to this spot, alone with my thoughts. The menacing sound of approaching footsteps stirs me. They stop outside my cell and the key turns. Metal hinges screech as the door is pushed open. Two silhouetted members of the OOE enter the room and loom over me. I flinch as one thrusts a hand in my direction, but there is no impact. "Take this statement," he says, his voice stern. "Learn it." I open one eye to find him holding a piece of paper for me to take. The other speaks next. "Tomorrow, you'll recite the contents of that note to the court." The statement is riddled with lies. Lies I must tell to free myself while condemning an innocent man. Incriminating evidence of occult practice has undoubtedly been planted, waiting for discovery once my statement is delivered. I must find my courage when I recite the statement. This is where my training will help me. I know I will have an ally present in the courtroom, someone who will see me deliver a second message simultaneously. While I speak those lies, I will discreetly signal that I'm under duress, using a code known to very few people. I noticed the detective had made his way back to the station in a cab, much faster than the Black Maria that carried me. I was not alone though. I had two escorts and a driver who guided the locomotive down the hard-packed dirt road. My bakery was a good front for my private investigation agency. I'm more of a well-trained mercenary than a reputable PI. Now that is over. I'd been discovered and framed for the murder of my wife. The guys tasked with escorting me to the station will not stand a chance when I make my move. I'm already working on the lock on the cuffs. I deliver a well-timed cough to muffle the click as it finally gives, and I release myself. In a swift movement, I thrust the cuffs into the Adam's apple of one escort, instantly crushing his windpipe. He goes down gasping for air that will never fill his lungs. The other escort barely reacts before my elbow breaks his eye socket. I stop his yelp as I catch him in a choke until he stops moving. He drops the keys to the cage door in the struggle. The cage door is to the rear, and I hop out discreetly onto the hard-packed dirt as the driver rounds the corner at the station, unaware of his failure. The lead detective is waiting at the gate for my arrival. "Where is the prisoner?" he booms. I smile and let the streets of Vileshire conceal me. The shipping canal cut across the countryside. Vileshire Docks was its destination. Vileshire Shipping Company controlled many of the veins of the canal that branched off of the main channel of water, charging toll fees to enter the city. The water in the cut sloshed against the bank on my right. I was heading up the muddy path to a toll house for my first day's work at Lock 13. On higher ground ahead of me was a lock with water forcing itself through small gaps in the closed gates and frothing when it landed. As I walked up the incline, the hissing water grew louder and I felt a few droplets speckle my cheek. I turned my head away from the water and focused on getting to work on time. Imagine how confused I was when water speckled my face again, on the left this time. The canal was to my right not a second earlier, and now I was walking down a different footpath with it on my left. The new route I was on quickly led me off the canal and to a road with hansom cabs going about their business, unaware of my need to get to work. I hailed a driver and asked for directions. "Never heard of it," he said. I ended up in a pub with a bunch of fellas dressed exactly like me. I never did find Lock 13. None of the fellas in the pub admitted to knowing about it, but the look on their faces told me differently. The flame of the candle flickered as I pondered my options. Thoughts danced around in my head, pirouetting from one synapse to the next. The blank page lay before me. How long I stared at it, I know not. So little on the page told me so much of the gravity of the decision I was about to make. On the one hand, if I didn't order the murder of my business partner, he could still be useful in future contract negotiations. He had landed us some long-term clients that earned the company a pretty penny. On the other hand, he knew too much. He could take me down if he so desired. Then and there I made my decision. He had to go. I wrote the instructions on the letter and held the red wax over the candle. The flame danced over the tip of the wax and began to distort it. A big blob dropped onto the letter and I stamped it. I had given the seal of approval, sentencing my business partner to death. I would have to pass it on myself. The fewer hands it passed through, the better. The door to my office had been open until this point. A force unknown to me set the door on its way to its closed position. The more it closed, the more it revealed the intruder that had been behind it the whole time, lurking in the shadows. A letter of his own was in his hand, with the seal broken. He produced a knife and shrugged. He said, "It's just business."
That was Flash Fiction by A.B. Frank. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is The Phenomenauts with Giving Up.
It's time that I leave. Been manipulating me like a puppet on a string. My heart hurts knowing I'll be found guilty, but it's best for you and it's like it's best for me. Giving up on you, you cause nothing but pain. Now I'm walking away. Don't expect to see me again. I'm giving up on you. You cause nothing but pain. Yeah, I'm walking away. Don't expect to see me again. What is wrong with me? Apparently I'm not good enough. Well, that's your fault. That's why I'm calling out your bluff. I think you're scared cause you missed your chance. Cause I could have loved you, but now that is in the past. Giving up on you, you cause nothing but pain. Yeah, I'm walking away. Don't expect to see me again. I'm giving up on you. You cause nothing but pain. Yeah, I'm walking away. Don't expect to see me again. So don't come crying when he breaks your heart. And don't come to me, you torn mine apart. And don't you dare shift the blame. 'Cause I'm sick and tired of playing games. Giving up on you, you cause nothing but pain. Yeah, I'm walking away. Don't expect to see me again. I'm giving up on you. 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 You cause nothing but pain.
The books I read, the secret places in my head, the words I wanted to write for you, and every tune I wish I knew. And the time we lose to sleep, the songs, melodies to make us weep, strange chords come at night to haunt you. Clouds blow past, become the shape of you. And where are you? Nowhere to be found. And adrift and run aground. And the lies, the promises we made, the echoes we relayed, is changing at the tides. And where are you? Nowhere to be found. And I adrift and run aground. And who are you? Did I let you down? And when you ran, never made a sound.
That was Adrift by Vicky Roy, and before that we had Giving Up by the Phenomenauts. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain, and it is time for us to head over to the Oak Shed for some weekly album reviews for this Twangling Jack Ford album review special.
Eurythmic's greatest hits. The 1980s were a boom time for digital synthesizer manufacturers, and every innovation would be lapped up by record producers. There was a lot of snobbery about factory presets, so nerdy types would type in new sounds playing with the algorithms and blinding us with science. Some great acts made their worst records, caught up in the excitement of the new. The Rolling Stones and Dylan were particularly tarnished. One of the few acts that I thought used the technology tastefully were Eurythmics. Annie Lennox and Dave Stewart had been in a power pop band called The Tourists, who had a hit with a cover of I Only Want to Be With You, and were so of the time with their skinny ties and blondie look that it was a shock that they split up, and Dave and Annie put together a synth duo. As someone who was always trying to make music on a budget, I was interested in their home studio recording method. Using a timecode on their tape machine, they were able to use a small number of live tracks and mix those together with sequence synthesizers going straight into the mix, giving a high quality sound on basic equipment. And that was how I worked, eventually. The first track on this album is Love is a Stranger. I can remember how this stood out amongst all the other synth pop at the time. Other acts seemed to be going for bright and bouncy and somehow falling short, or else they were droning like Tangerine Dream with Kraftwerk percussion. But it was the second track on this album that really made the Eurythmics. Sweet Dreams are made of this. A big bluesy distorted synth riff and a repetitive soulful vocal made it an instant classic. They wrote many great songs, and as time progressed it became less synth pop and more guitar rock. I remember seeing them on TV doing the very rocky anthemic When Tomorrow Comes, with a big band that included backing singers, and Clem Burke, the drummer from Blondie, whacking a massive beat and twirling his sticks. Like all 80s acts, the snare drum tends to get to the point of being a bit too loud, but they avoid a lot of the digital excess pitfalls, though Sex Crime does have the Max Headroom stutter. Someone I know recently described them inaccurately as the Scottish Pet Shop Boys, but having re-listened to their greatest hits and been reminded of Here Comes the Rain Again, Thorn in My Side, There Must Be an Angel, and Right by Your Side, I would have little hesitation in calling them the British ABBA. And ABBA never did a song with Aretha Franklin. Eurythmics' greatest hits. Stay With Me, an anthology of the Faces. I have done over 200 of these recommendations, and it must look like there is nothing I don't like, but there are plenty of acts I don't like and quite a few that I'm indifferent to. But the Faces are hard to place because I really don't much care for the singing of Rod Stewart, but there is much else about them that I do like. The Faces were formed when Steve Marriott left the Small Faces, leaving them without a singer and guitarist, and they recruited Rod Stewart and Ron Wood, who had been playing with Jeff Beck. The Faces were like a bunch of mates having a very boozy party. Part of their appeal was their sloppiness. They sounded like they were having a good time and you wanted to join them. The high point of their career must be the title track, Stay With Me. It shows off Ronnie Wood's Keith Richards chops and his slide guitar. Also Ian McLagan's barroom boogie piano. Other Stewart songs I quite like are You Can Make Me Dance, Sing and Everything, and their version of Paul McCartney's Maybe I'm Amazed. But two of my favourite tracks are Debris, written and sung by Ronnie Lane, the bass player, and the song that apart from Stay With Me has now become a classic, Ooh La La. This was also written by Ronnie Lane but was sung by Ronnie Wood. They only made 4 albums, so this double CD has most of what you might want, though not their version of The Temptations' I Wish It Would Rain, which is a bit of a pity. Ronnie Wood went on to do his Keith Richards thing in the real Rolling Stones. Kenny Jones, the drummer, joined The Who. Ronnie Lane had some solo success with songs like How Come and The Poacher, but died quite young. And Rod Stewart makes quite good model railways. Funkadelic, Maggot Brain. I am prone to falling down certain kinds of YouTube rabbit holes. One I can't stay away from is listings of top 10s. It could be albums, artists, musicians, or anything else music related. I was watching a top 10 guitarist video on a channel I very much respect, and I came across the name of Eddie Hazel of Funkadelic. His great claim to fame is the title track of this album, which is a long guitar instrumental. I found it on YouTube and entered another rabbit hole of versions of Maggot Brain, well-known guitarists like Carlos Santana and Buckethead, and unknown guitarists, and even a violin player. How had I reached such a ripe old age and not known any of this? Since I got into music, I've been aware of Funkadelic. I knew all about their eccentric leader, George Clinton. I have seen pictures and video clips of him and his band dressed like spacemen, with their spacecraft stage sets. I am familiar with their best known song One Nation Under a Groove, and I have heard numerous cover versions, but the one thing I should have known about was an epic guitar instrumental. And it only came to my attention in my 65th year on this planet. The guitar playing is melodic like Santana, with tasteful bends like Gilmour. It is played over a simple chord progression that has a simple rock beat, with little or no funk to it. It is a bit like the Purple Rain solo, and legend has it was done in one take. So having familiarised myself with the title track, I investigated the rest of the album and sort of fell in love with it. I bought a copy for driving. It is surprisingly low on funk, and I am not much of a fan of funk. This album is quite like Sly and the Family Stone. It is fun and bouncy and catchy. It has chanted choruses and interesting beats and strange instrumental and sound effects. It has some heavy rock riffing with soaring lead guitar that does the white rock of the time better than Led Zeppelin ever did funk. We get some Temptations-like ensemble vocals with deep bass notes, some shambolic party singing and a very catchy bonus track. To paraphrase another famous George Clinton album title, free your mind and your posterior will follow. Maggot Brain, Funkadelic. Meloria, the 2015 Grammy Award-winning album by Ghost, a Swedish rock band. I first encountered Ghost on Six Music, back when they were briefly known as Ghost BC, because another band was claiming the name Ghost. I was quite interested and sought out some of their videos on YouTube. Years later I found that YouTube were recommending I watch Ghost, who were doing massive stadium tours. I assumed it must be the other band, but it was not. They had dropped the BC, and by the look of the costumes were obviously the same band. I was convinced to look further into their music by a clip of the two guitarists doing a comedy routine. They were competing with each other, trading riffs and licks, which culminated in them playing Sweet Home Alabama. I don't see how anyone who likes any kind of rock music could with any honesty say they do not like anything on this album. It has been said that Ghost are the missing link between Black Sabbath and ABBA, but they also have the comic book Satanism, the catchy pop songs, and the riffing and twisted humour of Blue Oyster Cult. And they have the theatrics of Alice Cooper. I am also reminded that Hell was where Meatloaf came out of like a bat, and where AC/DC took the highway too. There is also that choral sound you get on Doctor Who incidental music that captures the essence of Carmena Burana. In fact, the album actually ends with a medievalish choral piece. The Meloria CD came with a bonus CD of an EP that came out about the same time. It has one original song and 4 covers. It is called Pope Star. The whole Ghost extravaganza is the twisted brainchild of one man, Tobias Forge. He writes the songs, sings lead and produces the record. He dresses in heavy makeup as a satanic pope, and his musicians are all called unnamed ghouls and all wear masks. The riffs have all the hallmarks of metal, the muted compressed fuzz tones in dark minor keys. It should sound depressing, but it somehow sounds uplifting, almost Eurovision. The solos soar and the drums thunder, but nothing overpowers the earwormy melodies sung by Forge. The Devil's Pope makes Satanism sound such jolly good fun. But he would do, wouldn't he? They do say the devil has all the best tunes. Meloria, Ghost.
You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. We've been having some album reviews from Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review special. And this is Without My Addiction with In the Name of Progress. That was In the Name of Progress by Without My Addiction. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to head back over to the Oak Shed now to catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album reviews for the album review special.
Gong, the Flying Teapot Trilogy. Gong were an Anglo-French ensemble fronted by an Australian. They made 4 albums with their classic early 70s lineup, Camembert Electric, and this trilogy of The Flying Teapot, Angel's Egg and You. I first heard Gong on a Sunday afternoon radio show on BBC Radio London. It may have been called Fresh Garbage because the song Fresh Garbage by Spirit was the theme tune. Because they announced they were playing music by Gong, and I knew that Gong had a soft machine connection, I had my cassette recorder ready and recorded 2 songs from the Flying Teapot album. One of them had some naughty words which appealed greatly to my puerile schoolboy sensibilities. The music was interesting and challenging in places. The songs were a bit like David Bowie in his Anthony Newley phase. The Starman could have been waiting in the sky in a flying teapot. Over the 3 albums it runs the gamut from nursery rhymes to modal jazz. It is a bit spacey in a Hawkwind kind of way, with whooshing noises and echoes on the voices. They cover different world musics. There is plenty of music with an Eastern influence. On the first album this tends to be a bit hackneyed, like a Wilson Keppel and Betty Sand dance in the old bazaar in Cairo. Then on the second album you might think they are taking things a bit more seriously, till they sing Harry Harry Supermarket and Harry Harry London Bus. There is also a Plinky Plonk Oriental section and a Cockney pub knees up. One Gong trademark was the Space Whisper, a female voice shrieking in an almost Jane Birkin Je t'aime manner, reverberating as if from the bottom of a great chasm. The thing that made it stand out from Soft Machine and other prog rock at the time was it all sounded fun. Humour seemed to be as big a part of it as the musical dexterity. It was not the Zappa-type satire of the times, but a more British goon show Pythonesque daftness with silly voices, and a daft tale of a hero called Zero, with pothead pixies, and a floating radio station called Radio Gnome Invisible. It was sort of like Lord of the Rings meets the Teletubbies. I never really felt the need to follow the story. It probably follows the story arc of The Wizard of Oz, because they always do. Gong were the first big gig I ever went to. It was at the Lyceum. Beer was 26p a pint. Steve Hillage was very much the lead guitar hero. David Allen was the singer and rhythm guitarist, dressed in hippie robes, and he preached hippie messages of peace, disguised as trippy fairy stories. It was the craziest music imaginable, played with dedication and precision by mysterious players who had been given silly names like Captain Beefheart's Magic Band members. The third album effectively brings all the musical styles and philosophies together like a sonic United Nations. They were serious times for music fans. Young men of my ilk would analyse the playing and study the lyrics. We would arrange attributes in hierarchies. We would rank and argue and speculate. But Gong defied all attempts to categorise. They were the most fun you could have listening to quite experimental music. And at the end of it all, you could follow the advice of the Pothead Pixies and have a cup of tea. And another one. The Flying Teapot Trilogy. Gong. Ivor Cutler. Life in a Scotch Sitting Room Volume 2. A CD I found in the British Heart Foundation charity shop in High Wycombe. I used to tune into the John Peel show on Radio 1 at 10 o'clock in the evening, hoping to hear electric guitars in all their glory. But more often than not it was folk music or experimental percussion or throat singing. You might hear Slade or Kevin Ayres or Captain Beefheart, but you would have to wade your way through June Tabor or Lol Coxhill. The one regular non-rock act that seemed to appeal to my kind was Ivor Cutler. We would regularly hear spoken pieces in his Tales from a Scotch Sitting Room series. Comedy tales told in a soft, lilting Scottish accent. Often we would remember quotable lines and retell them to each other in that Monty Python dead parrot fashion. And then there were the songs. Comedy that demanded you pay attention to get the joke, sung softly to a droning harmonium, sometimes like shaggy dog stories that kept you waiting for a groan-inducing payoff based on an obvious pun, like the song Shoplifters, being about lifting up shops. Ivor Cutler previously had had a whole career of comedy and songwriting. He had appeared in the Beatles TV extravaganza, Magical Mystery Tour. But it is those 1970s John Peel show sessions that helped skew the worldview of many of my generation. The comedy is in the preposterously grand adjectives used to describe the minutest of details. It is the comedy of the unexpected and of observations from an unexpected angle. It is poetic like Les Dawson, Victoria Wood, John Cooper Clarke, John Hegley and the Liverpool Poets. In one well-known episode, in place of a trip to the seaside, the parents share out grains of sand, 3 each. They can use these to build sandcastles, while the girls, with small amounts of salt on their tongues, blow on the boys to give a sea breeze effect that is enhanced by a chance expulsion of spittle. This collection benefits from being recorded live, and there are points where Cutler is forced to drop the dour laconic observations to laugh at his own joke, and I had never before heard him laugh. I also found a series of jungle advice pieces I had never heard before, such as, on being attacked by an owl intent on pecking your eyes, slip on a pair of dark glasses. He will imagine that another owl has been there just before him, and he will sail off with a disappointed hoot. Life in a Scotch Sitting Room, Volume 2, Ivor Cutler. Psycho Candy, the Jesus and Mary chain. For me, punk ended in December 1977, when I saw the Sex Pistols at Brunel University, and it turned out I was a spectator in the great rock and roll swindle. So when a band came along who played like punks, looked like punks and behaved like punks, causing mayhem at their gigs and being totally unreliable, I presume they must have seen the film and taken notes. They had a provocative name and they got lots of press, music and tabloid, and the whole thing reeked of Svengali. I heard their John Peel sessions and they didn't seem to even have very much energy about them. It was slow and droning and very distorted. But then their single got played on the radio, even though it seemed to be about drug use. And I could hear what they were trying to do, and I probably hated them for it, but I loved it all the same. The slow drone and the semi-intelligible singing was like Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground. The reverb-drenched production and the boom-cha-ba-boom-cha drums were like the Phil Spector wall of sound. And the song did that thing of teasing you, making you yearn for the chorus. The song was Some Candy Talking, and I bought the single, and it was the last single I ever bought. The album launches with a song even more Spectre-ish than the single. The songs are melodic and would sound quite sweet had they been played acoustically. But had they done that, few would have taken much notice. What we have is vocals that are just about audible over the extreme distortion of the guitars. It sounds like a monitor mix that a guitarist might sneak out of a studio to impress his girlfriend, but that no sane producer would ever have allowed to be released. There are elements of surf music, only you would need to imagine the Beach Boys playing their guitars through massive Marshall stacks in an empty swimming pool. There is a song called Sowing Seeds. It occurs towards the end of the album. It has guitars that are much less overpowering. On it you can hear how sweet the vocals are, and you can even hear the harmonies. But if they had mixed all the tracks that way, it would have all sounded the same. In fact, they managed to up the ante for the final track with what sounds like a dentist drill turned up to 11. Psycho Candy, the Jesus and Mary chain. Jimmy Cliff, The Harder They Come. In the late 60s and early 70s, there were plenty of reggae hit singles, mostly on Trojan records. Acts like Desmond Decker, Nicky Thomas, Bob and Marcia, and Dave and Ansel Collins, but this was considered to be skinhead music. I was not a skinhead, but I liked reggae. There was also Jimmy Cliff. Jimmy Cliff was on Island Records. Island was the big rock label of the time, with acts like Traffic, King Crimson and Free. The rock fans who hated reggae probably did not know that the island was Jamaica. But because Jimmy Cliff was on Island Records, he did have a bit more credibility. Then he starred in the film The Harder They Come, a film about gangsters and the Jamaican music scene. His songs on the soundtrack are, for me, the best of that pre-Bob Marley catchy pop reggae. It launches with the chirpy horns that start "You Can Get It If You Really Want." And the album also has the title track and his sublime classic "Many Rivers to Cross." It has tracks by other artists, one of which is the original Rivers of Babylon by the Melodians. One of the tracks is in the ska style that preceded reggae. This has a more conventional drum pattern. The reggae drum has the snare on the third beat, so it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, ch. Reggae is like a machine with all the parts moving independently, creating a whole that is bigger than the parts. The bass goes bubba-da-da-dum, bubba-da-da-dum. A staccato guitar goes diddle-diddle-dum, 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 and a wobbly organ goes cha-cha, cha-cha. The film was fairly successful and made Jimmy Cliff reggae music's first international star. The Harder They Come, Jimmy Cliff. Johnny Cash, live at Folsom Prison. There was a point in the timeline of the development of popular music when rock and roll and country were bedfellows. In Sun Studios, Elvis and Johnny Cash made comparable records. I have never much liked the country music that eventually became standard. The whining pedal steel guitar, the mawkish lyrics and the yodeling tear-stained southern drawl. But on Live at Folsom Prison, Johnny Cash has a sound where you can still recognise a touch of rock and roll. Folsom Prison Blues has even become a standard amongst rock musicians. The songs on this album are often short and often funny. They play to the captive audience with themes of wrongdoing, incarceration and even execution, and they find humour in each of these subjects. He does a version of Green Green Grass of Home which fits the tone perfectly. He brings his wife on to duet on Jackson, and a bonus track on the CD ends it with a touch of gospel. He pays little attention to playing or singing perfectly, prioritising the narrative to the songs, the audience interaction, and just being entertaining. Unlike his contemporaries with their colourful onesies, fake cowboy hats and tassels, fringes, buttons and bows, there was always something very cool about Johnny Cash. The man in black, with a sneer in his voice, cocking a snook against the man. I usually play at the first Sunday Electric Jam at the Bellevue pub in High Wycombe. The host band is the excellent Splash the Cash, who play these kind of rocking Johnny Cash songs. I usually follow them, and they usually finish with the song Stripes, which is on this album, and is permanently stuck in my head. Swing That Music, a compilation of Louis Armstrong that I rescued from being thrown away. People mostly call him Louis, but in the song Hello Dolly he sings, "This is Louis, Dolly." When I was a kid there was a trad jazz revival, and acts like Kenny Ball and Akka Bilk had hit singles and did their well-rehearsed jazz improv thing on light entertainment shows. It is that jazz that is all about boater hats, flashy waistcoats and wind instruments dancing around each other to the rhythm of a banjo and upright bass. There is some of that kind of thing on these old scratchy recordings, probably sampled from '78, but not as much as you would expect. There are a lot of bluesy numbers with sung verses, one with the great singer Bessie Smith. And there are trumpet solos that lift the piece at exactly the right moment, with dazzling flows of notes, often with the kind of phrasing you will still hear guitarists using today. They have the energy of the revolutionary and the earthiness of the bottom rung of a new genre yet to be intellectualised and codified. It was just people having fun making music for people who wanted to have fun. Armstrong came along right at the beginning of recording and he took the indisciplined jazz of the time and refined it. He tamed the unruly beast to make the pop songs of the day. I only really appreciated his importance when I watched the TV series Treme, which was made by the makers of The Wire and was set in post-Katrina New Orleans. The things I remembered Armstrong for was the song What a Wonderful World and the James Bond song, and the way he mopped his head with his hanky. He was the first pop star. He invented scat singing. He was the first to sing with a totally individual voice. He had a voice like no other, yet it has influenced singers ever since. And he was a virtuoso trumpet player. Listening to these early recordings, you can feel the energy and hear the influence on the big jazz bands, the electric blues bands, and R&B, soul and rock music. When I press my booster pedal and I hope to hit that long lunar note, that I hope will make the Electric Jam audiences take me to their hearts, I am invoking the spirit of the great Louis Armstrong.
Big thank you to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album reviews. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain, and this is Maz Manzini with Avocado.
Take a stacking up, skewering it up on the line. 5 a.m. I get up, not easy. 3 months rent to cough up, not easy. A romance in your cup, not easy. All the while, it's green, you want it, velvet, sweet avocado. Dijon, balsamic oil and eat avocado. Sweet avocado. Margaret duck, curing the salmon on the side. Summer wild and rough, surely a breed in decline. Every day's the same, diners don't know your name. Speak your mind like Bourdain did in his life. It's green, you want it, velvet, sweet avocado. Dijon, balsamic oil and eat avocado. Sweet avocado. Star anise, cinnamon, cloves and curry leaves, fennel, coconut milk, paste and lower heat. Simmer gently, tomatoes and red chilies. Up the heat, up the heat, up the heat.
Time passes slow through these 2 weeks. Oh, you left me alone. I fell to my knees. Oh, the loneliness built my walls again grew. Oh, heart always flew with your tear. Oh, you promised forever you'll always love me. Oh, I need you, however, do you need me? Oh, I know you're hurting, but you're hurting me. I'll never stop working, I can't seem to breathe. I don't wanna lose you, but what can I do? If you choose to leave me in these 2 weeks. Oh, in these 2 weeks. Oh, you know that I'll help you through thick and through thin. You know that I'll guide you, whatever it brings. Just let me be beside you and help you along the way. I never will break your heart or leave you halfway. Hey, in these 2 weeks. Oh, I know you're hurting, but you're hurting me. I never stop working, I can't seem to breathe. Don't wanna lose you, but what can I do if you choose to leave me in these 2 weeks? Oh.
That was 2 Weeks by Caitlin McAvoy, and before that we had Avocado by Maz Manzini. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. This is the part of the show where we normally catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for a weekly album review, but as it's a weekly album review special, we're going to skip that. So instead we have the usual reminders. You can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Archer on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. We are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please do leave a review for us on your podcast provider of choice. And you can also email me here at the studio on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. So I'm going to love you and leave you. This is one last tune to say goodbye to you guys with. This is Horizon 4 by previous guest John C. Buttigieg. I'll catch you next week.